Well, you struck a chord there,
Yes.
Jose Maria. Kumi, you're an agent of change too.
So, Jose Maria, after that wonderful eloquence, I think I'll get Greenpeace to recruit you as its next staff member. Because that's the kind of...
Actually, I volunteered, but they didn't want to take me.
Okay. The second thing I want to say...
It's turning into a love-in. We've got to stop this,
So the
I
second
think.
thing is, I was wanting to say that if you want to give me 3 of your best ties, I'll happily take them. So, thank you. But I think the Gandhi quotation is really helpful because the most powerful Gandhi quotation flowing out of that one that's very relevant for the point that Jose Maria made so eloquently is simply this. This planet has enough to meet all of humanity's need, but not all of humanity's greed. And that's really what we have to begin to be asking. Because I come from South Africa, right? Let me just tell you, in my country, the gap between the rich and poor is growing at such an astronomical rate. It's unsustainable. And let's look at the quality of life for the rich people. Their walls are having to go higher and higher. Their gates are having to get stronger and stronger. And their mental happiness, as Sean, my fellow South African, can tell you there, is actually going down. So we have to begin to think. And it really, what the young people were saying, they got it right. They kept saying we have to imagine and vision a different way. We have to be willing to change. And you know, the other thing Mahatma Gandhi always said was, be the change you want to be. And there's a young woman here from the UK who asked a question about health. And, you know, she made a point of saying, I'm coming to this thing on climate change in Geneva from Leeds. I'm not going to come by plane. She took a train to Paris and rode 3 days from Paris to get here. Now, I'm not saying that Jose needs to come with a bicycle from Timor-Leste to a meeting like this. But I do think that we also have to begin, even in the NGO sector, if I can be quite bold, to question our own ways of operating, whether we're using resources more effectively and so on. And I do think that if we can model the kind of changes that we want our leaders to actually promote at negotiations such as Copenhagen in our own practice, that in itself begins to be part of the advocacy that is needed at this point in time.
Thank you. It starts with every single person in this room. I think we have a questioner down here. I'm just going to hand you the mic.
Sure. Hi there. I'm MJ Mace. I guess I'm one of those rare birds, a female climate negotiator. There are quite a few, actually. There's an excellent one from Costa Rica. I think you may know her.
My sister.
Exactly. She's fantastic. We've had quite a few discussions about Copenhagen, about numbers. And one of the things that's interesting to me is that we hear 20, we hear 30, we hear 40. Small island states have said what we see is needed is at least 45% by 2020. Interestingly, that's a number that hasn't been picked up by the media. It's a number that's not only been supported by small island states, but by Costa Rica and quite a number of other countries. The reason I flag that is not for the number itself, but to flip it and say we've also heard discussions on numbers from developing countries. And I wonder if you think that there's value in trying to put a number on what we might be able to expect from developing countries, of course supported and enabled by technology transfer and finance. But you know, we talk about it in the context of development assistance, but would it be useful to try to have an aspirational goal for what could come from developing countries as part of the global solidarity that we need from this package? Thank you.
Yes, I do think there's value talking about numbers because, amongst other things, we need to be held accountable as we move forward, and numbers are an easy way to be held accountable. Personally, I am more in the camp of those scientists like Jim Hansen that most recently have come out and said, guess what? We shouldn't be at 450 as an aspirational roof on emissions, 450 ppm, parts per million. We should be bringing that down to 350 parts per million. Now, I understand that 450, 350, 500, all of these numbers are kind of hocus pocus to most of us. One way of looking at that debate and at the numbers is assessing risk. Because math, porque las matemáticas no mienten. How do I say that in English? Because math does not, thank you. Because math does not lie. Today we're at 385 parts per million. We're accumulating 2.5 parts per million per year. 90 years to the end of the century times 2.5 is 225 plus 385 is 610. Way over what scientists say is permissible if we want to have less than 2 °C temperature changes. So scientists also say that anything over 450 parts per million gives us a 50% chance of having plus minus 5 °C changes. Think about that. 50% chance of having plus or minus 5 °C changes. The last time we had plus 5 °C, crocodiles were swimming in the North Pole, and the last time we had minus 5 degrees was only 10,000 years ago in the last glacial period. So, Mr. Pictet, if I walked up to you and I said, sir, you have 50% chance of inheriting to your children plus or minus 5 °C, but I can sell you an insurance policy that will lower the risk from 50% to less than 4%. How much of your salary are you willing to pay for that insurance policy?
Quite a lot of money.
Quite a lot of money. How about you, Mr. President?
50%.
50%. Good man. Good man. Nicholas Stern says that all we have to pay is 1 to 2%. 1 to 2% of GDP is what brings the risk down from 50% to less than 4%. And I think that that's a price that we can pay. We just came out of a lunch held by the Global European Climate, pardon me? Thank you, sir. European Climate Foundation. 100 billion is what's needed, 100 billion per year, it's what's needing to pay for mitigation and adaptation in the countries that I agree with you because I come from those countries, my friend. 100 million is what we need to pay for mitigation and adaptation. 100 million per year, that's 10% of what we're spending on weapons today. 10% of what we spend on weapons.
I'm going to interrupt you because I'm not sure you've entirely answered the question that was put over there, which is about what should the developing world be doing too, I think. Was that the question? Kumi.
Yeah, I think the developing world certainly has to step up to the plate. I think that if we are expecting developing countries to make firm commitments, they will be also needing to ensure that there are firm commitments on the resources for adaptation that comes with commitments that are made, and that's part of the problem. But I certainly don't think that we can escape that every single country, big and small, is going to have to actually look at what commitments that they actually make. However, I do think that we need to just be a bit cautious about putting all developing countries in one basket, right? Because quite often, you know, India and China gets quoted all the time as examples of two of the biggest emitters now and so on, and the rest of the developing countries get lumped with them by association, if not intention. So I do think there has to be a little bit of a differentiated approach in terms of small island nation states, for example, for least developed countries, and so on, because unless you have a little bit of a differentiated approach in terms of what the expectations are, I think it will be much more difficult to actually get the kind of buy-in that is needed from developing countries. But I do think the spirit of the conversation, though, if we're going to get an agreement from developing countries, is that we have to understand the historical culpability as well as that we're not operating from a level playing field in terms of everybody is not starting from the same point, you know, on the sprint line.
Okay, thank you, Kumi. I think we've got a questioner at the very back over there, sir.